Brought to you by Penguin.
When the Clock Broke. Conmen, Conspiracists, and the Road to Trump's America by John Ganz. Read by Eric Jason Martin.
Introduction. The End. History, as the cliché goes, is written by the winners. But this is a history of the losers. Candidates who lost their elections, movements that bubbled up and fizzled out, protests that exploded and dissipated, writers who toiled at the margins of American life, figures who became briefly famous or infamous, and then were forgotten. Some of the characters are still well remembered, but the substance of what they said, did, and meant is not. Their defeats are as important to the history of this country as the temporary victories of their opponents. Just as socialism seemed to exit the world stage, the protagonists of this book envisioned another end. Sensing that America as they knew it was in peril, they hoped to recast American democracy around the negative solidarity of knowing who you hated or wanted to destroy. The system would be based on domination and exclusion, a restricted sense of community that jealously guarded its boundaries and policed its members, and the direction of a charismatic leader who would use his power to punish and persecute for the sake of restoring lost national greatness. In a period when some said that ideological struggle was irrelevant and that even history itself had ended, they looked for inspiration among the ideological ruins of earlier times: nationalism, populism, racism, anti-Semitism, and even fascism. In the words of one, they wanted to break the clock of progress, returning America to a previous dispensation, while also creating an entirely new country of their own devising. And while they lost, in the short term, they brought to the surface an intense anguish in American life, a politics of national despair that has returned with greater force. This is also the history of a period whose significance hasn't been fully understood. The President of the United States at the time called it weird. It's a time out of joint with the two eras of, at least superficial, prosperity and optimism that preceded and followed it, but it may feel more familiar today. It was an era where America felt itself to be losing out, losing its dominant place in the world, losing the basis of its security and wealth, and losing its sense of itself, as if a storm cloud rapidly gathered over the country and the national mood suddenly turned dour, gloomy, fearful, and angry. Americans were fed up. Leaders found once loyal constituencies deaf to their appeals. The two-party system received its strongest challenge for nearly 100 years. The country witnessed its worst single episode of public disorder since the Civil War, and oddballs, cranks, and even crooks captured the public imagination more than staid figures of reasonable authority. Paranoia was the new common sense. The country seemed to be seeking something new, a break with the exhausted possibilities of the past, but also a restoration, a way to recover what had been lost. This episode of crisis was not unforeseeable or unprecedented. It was a conjuncture where chronic troubles briefly took on acute expression, but then appeared to go into remission or repose. A lightning flash revealed a fractious and fragmented nation. The thunderclap would not be heard for some time. What added to the weirdness of the time is that it should have been a moment of triumph. At its start, America had won the Cold War. The Berlin Wall would soon fall. The Soviet Union was retreating worldwide and on the verge of collapse. Democracy and capitalism were apparently the only viable political and economic systems remaining. Freedom, both political and economic, had prevailed. This was the content of President Ronald Reagan's farewell message from the Oval Office in January 1989. Countries across the globe are turning to free markets and free speech.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?